Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Intel at the Edge. I'm your host, Chip Usher. Today, I talked to Alec Bierbauer. Alec is a retired CIA officer and was one of the founders, one of the core members of the team that launched the agency's Predator program during the lead up to and the early stages of the global war on terror and the fight against Osama bin Laden. He's written a book about his experiences, Never Mind, We'll Do It Ourselves, which is a terrific read. If you ever have the opportunity, I highly recommend you read it. Today, we talk about the program, the history of it, how it got started, the early successes, and what Alec's views are about the future of drone warfare. I hope you enjoy it. If you have questions or comments, your feedback is welcome. You can reach us at inteledge@scasp.ai. Alec Bierbauer, welcome to Intelligence at the Edge. I'm so glad you could make it today.
Thanks, Chip. It's good to be here. I'm excited for the conversation.
You wrote this book, Never Mind, We'll Do It Ourselves, a couple of years ago. I've been meaning to read it, finally got to read it, and it is the fascinating story of how CIA started, under your leadership, what is now a very famous drone program in the early stages, even prior to 9/11. So we're excited to talk to you about the book and your experience creating the Predator program.
Absolutely, it's come a long way, but yeah, we'll dive into the history lesson, I guess, first. So.
The history as a prelude, a setup to what we're seeing today and in the future with increasing reliance on drones. But let's go back, because I think not many Americans recall that the agency was hyper-focused on al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden way before 9/11 happened.
Correct.
And in fact, the origins of the Predator program began before 9/11. And I think that's an important fact that bears remembering. And I wonder if you could first talk about how you came to CIA, what your early career was like, and why you made the decision to join the agency. And then we'll talk a little bit about those early days for the hunt for Osama bin Laden.
Sure. No, absolutely. And, so for me, after leaving CIA and after kind of coming out to my friends, family, and former colleagues, it was the big surprise of how did this kid from, a misspent youth wind up at CIA.
Right.
But I did. I got my act together, enlisted in the Army, became a warrant officer. I was an intel warrant officer. And spent then a little less than a year on the Hill for Senate Armed Services. Showed up as the Army guy, and I got put on the Sea Power Subcommittee.
Makes sense.
Absolutely. But gave me the chance to work with guys like Trent Lott and John McCain and support Bob Dole on the Seawolf submarine project. So it was a brief period of time there, but it really turned my interest and my opportunities from the military to the civilian side or the federal service side. First started at Defense Intelligence. Went there as an analyst when my brigade commander from my early years in Korea showed up to testify on the Hill for the Scott O'Grady shoot-down in the Balkans. And he's like, what are you doing here? You were an E4, E5 sitting in Korea. And I'm like, oh, I'm sitting here now. And he's like, come work for me at DIA. And that was General Pat Hughes, just passed away a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So
great
went
IC leader.
Went to DIA as an analyst working terrorist facilities, basically building the database on everything from Hamas and Hezbollah in the Bekaa Valley and Syria, but then also starting to look at this territory that we really hadn't focused on, which was Afghanistan. So this is, mid-late 90s, about the same time that bin Laden, who was an unknown character at the time, was kind of pushed out of Sudan and into Afghanistan. So through my service at DIA and working at the Pentagon and doing some briefing team stuff, doing a lot of product development, really diving deep on terrorist facilities. After the East Africa embassy bombings in 1998, there was this, the Clinton administration wanted to respond, wanted targets in Afghanistan and Sudan, so worked on part of that program, and there was a natural point in there where it said, the system was like, we need, from the Pentagon side, we want somebody, more deeply embedded inside CIA. I was up for it. As an early intel guy in the Army, that's kind of the pinnacle. So I'm like, send me. And I got detailed to CIA. Spent the first year, working with people like Rich Blee and Cofer Black, Charlie Allen on the 7th floor.
Legends in the intelligence community and at CIA.
Exactly. Yeah. So really a lot of what we'll talk about and a lot of what's in the book was, in that period where I was just at CIA as a detailee and then transitioned into a staff position, became a case officer, but really never left the technology aspects of what a traditional human intelligence organization was really trying to figure out. How does some of this tech really fit into our mission set? So that's, those were the early years getting me into CIA.
And you described early in the book one or maybe more than one meeting at CIA headquarters where you're trying to figure out, well, how do we touch these guys? How do we find them? How do we operate in what are some denied areas, some tough, rugged areas of Afghanistan and elsewhere? How did you kind of hit upon the idea of having a drone as the solution, and how did you figure out that Predator was the platform and the vehicle?
Sure. Yeah, so the foundational requirement, and anybody familiar with how the Defense Department or now the War Department develops technologies, and certainly we did at CIA the same way. It's like, what's your mission? What are you trying to accomplish? Not what's your technology looking for a problem. And there was a top secret special compartmented information memo since declassified. We talk about it a fair amount in the book, which has been cleared by Publication Review Board. It actually took longer to clear it than it did to write it. But this memo came out from the Clinton administration saying, we're not doing enough against al-Qaeda, we're not doing enough against bin Laden. What are we going to do to, and then very deliberately it states, put U.S. eyes on target for actionable intelligence. And then the kicker that I didn't know was hard at the time is that in 9 months. And
much time.
Anybody familiar with the acquisition system and technology development will say not much happens in 9 months. And at that point, that was certainly true. So we set some really early conditions. Like, we can't just start from a complete cocktail napkin kind of sketched idea. We gotta find something on the shelf that's going to be applicable. We knew from an agency perspective that we were not going to get a U.S. person. We weren't going to get one of our case officers on the ground in front of bin Laden to put U.S. eyes literally on the target and be able to report that back. We just weren't positioned to be able to do that. So we took the approach of, well, let's see if we can find a technical solution to do this. Afghanistan being a landlocked country, and it bears reminding folks that this is in 2000, so there are no U.S. persons in Afghanistan.
Right.
So it was, as a landlocked country, the Pentagon was not willing to put a U.S. person over Afghanistan in a manned aircraft. The Air Force was experimenting with unmanned systems. There's nothing new about drones, right? They used to be called unmanned air vehicles. Before that, they were called drones for a while. They've been called, model airplanes. The technology has certainly evolved, but the premise of an unmanned collection platform was not particularly new. And frankly, from my early days at the Pentagon, I watched the Israelis and their drone program operating against Hezbollah in the Bekaa Valley. So for me, there was some foundational, we can do this without a man over Afghanistan and the risk of somebody getting shot down and not being able to recover. So those premises really drove us to Predator. So now, and you understand this certainly from your background with the agency as well. The prospect of going outside the building to find a solution in somebody else's backyard is not always a popular one, and so when
contravenes our preference for compartmentation and secrecy.
Exactly. So going to into the system and saying, we think the Pentagon's got the capability. We need to work together. And in fact, the memo really directed us to collaborate with the Pentagon. It was a very deliberate, take our authorities. We had some very unique authorities. Take our access and blend it with the technologies that the Pentagon had. And that yielded, a series of meetings, some of them very low-level working group meetings, and some of them seventh floor debates over whether we were going to involve the Pentagon in this. And the net effect was not just Predator. We had a suite of technologies that were, really intended to work in concert with each other for that detection and then cueing the aircraft. And it bears reminding it at that point this was a unarmed system, really as an overt collection tool that we turned into more of a clandestine one.
And the Pentagon had flown Predator prior. I think they had flown it in the Balkans.
Correct.
But I think in those early days, a lot of things were line of sight, and you needed a system that could be controlled via satellite.
Yes.
And beam back real-time images to a third location, right? So there was a very complex communication and command and control overlay, right, that you had to solve.
The technology was, and I, not being a technologist, knew that I needed to surround myself with some really smart people. And we, when you can share the prospect of what we were doing, which we couldn't often do, but in the right classification circles in this compartmented program, when people knew what we were doing, there was no shortage of people volunteering to help out. Yeah. So it wasn't hard to build the team, but it was hard to solve some of the technology challenges, things that are very routine today. The prospect of not just one hop to a satellite to extend your range to the aircraft, but we really got forced to do multiple hops to spread that geography even further. And initially, we flew with our ground control station with our pilots. Our actual pilots were sitting in Germany, flying platforms over Afghanistan. And then as the program progressed and we weaponized it, we couldn't do that without involving the Germans, which at the time wasn't something that the agency was willing to do. So we then had to pull it back to the U.S. So literally flying from half a world away, which we do on a daily basis now.
But was completely novel at the time.
It was very novel at the time.
And so this is early to mid 2000, right?
Yes.
And you scored some early successes proving the efficacy of the project. Can you describe some of those? I'm thinking of the achievement over Turnak Farm.
Sure. Yep, absolutely. So September of 2000, a full year ahead of 9/11, on our, I think it was on our 8th mission to fly into Afghanistan without, for the most part, the Afghans knowing about it. We set up our mission planning for where do we think bin Laden might be, and we had some awesome analysts that were, they were pulling apart all of our human intelligence traffic, all of our signals intelligence traffic, what we had learned in the prior 7 flights in Afghanistan, and they're like, it's Friday, he's going to go to Friday prayers somewhere. Some of the intelligence was suggesting he was down near Kandahar, and we knew he had a facility there called Turnak Farm just outside from the airport. So we're like, let's be over Turnak Farms for prayers, and sure enough, out comes what we've referred to as the Man in White video. It's daytime in Afghanistan. It's nighttime at headquarters. We're standing in front of the big screens, and just it was clear right away that here's this character being shown deference from the people around him out basically in the parking lot, He's dressed different. He's noticeably taller, and he's heading towards the building we believed was the mosque. And we're sitting there in real time watching this. And again, it's common now to be able to piece these things together. It becomes somewhat routine. But at the time, that was groundbreaking. And when we went back and reviewed some of our earlier missions, we actually saw him on mission 1.
Really?
We were still, I think the chapter, I don't know whether it stayed in the edits or not, but it was like, I think the chapter was called like Monkeys Staring at Ceiling Fans or something, because it was like us and our analysts watching full motion video, where they were used to looking at single image satellite chips. It was just the flood of information, the data, the amount of data that had to be processed was just exceptional. But again, we had some great analysts that went back and like, we actually found them on the first mission.
I didn't realize it was on mission 1, and what an incredible moment, because the agency, almost alone, obviously with a lot of help and focus from the Pentagon, but was focused on bin Laden, particularly after the 1998 attacks against our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Then, of course, there was the bombing of the USS Cole, right in the midst of this campaign that you were engaged in, which I know galvanized the team to work even harder and faster. And I'm sure you counted on the support that you were getting from several leaders of the agency and the NSC and elsewhere. Maybe you can just mention some of the key players. You've talked about Kofor, you talked about Charlie Allen. Remind us who they were and who else was sort of involved in pushing and protecting the program during those early days.
Yeah, and it's, when we get asked the question of, are these the types of things that can be done now? Or was this a unique alignment of the planets and stars to be able to pull this off? And there were certainly some substantial backers in significant positions. You mentioned Dick Clark and Charlie Allen. Dick Clark, who is the counterterrorism czar at the NSC at the time, was an absolute driving force behind much of this, much to the frustration of CIA at the time. And but he was just dogged in forcing really the agency and the Pentagon to no is not an acceptable answer.
Yeah.
Charlie Allen, sitting as the ADCI for collections, managing all collection assets at that point in time. Similarly, like, we're going to do this. We're going to figure it out. And, no is not acceptable. And every roadblock that got put up, technology-wise or bureaucratic-wise, he was taking them down as fast as they were going up. Kofor Black was running the counterterrorism center at the time. Same intensity against bin Laden, but a little bit more oriented towards, traditional CIA approaches to the problem set. And he really did force us to justify, why we couldn't do this with other capabilities. And Predator by itself is not the answer without the intelligence that drives where you're going to go and, that confirming piece. You're never going to get a full, photo recognition, positive ID off of Predator by itself. So Kofor really drove us to up our game and make sure that we were integrated with NSA for the SIGINT,
right,
and with the Pentagon certainly for other capabilities and resources. And then there's others on the Pentagon side. At Air Force, you had Snake Clark, a big personality who was the first one to volunteer take my airplanes. Later on, we had to figure out how to pay for them, and I learned about the Economies Act and some of those limitations. But Snake Clark was one. Soup Campbell, General Campbell, was the senior military officer at CIA, an Air Force pilot. Was absolutely instrumental in doing this. And then, my counterpart at the time. And I was a GS-14 at CIA, but on the Pentagon side, there's this guy, Alex Lovett, who was running like the technology demonstration programs for emerging technologies. He's still there. He's still pushing, technologies super aggressively. But he was the one at more senior than I was, but closer to the action officer level than some of the other names. He was the one that was forcing us to, let's go talk to Lawrence Livermore. Let's go talk to General Atomics. Let's go out to Sandia. Let's see what the art of the possible is, not just on Predator and the known pieces, but how do you manage that much data? How are you processing terabytes of data?
Because, it was brand new to be sucking in live video, live images over, an 8-hour mission, say. Like, how do you process that? There was no plan for it at the time.
Correct. So all that said, the team at the working level was exceptional and handpicked. The team at the interface with policy, which we saw on a near daily basis, as there was daily updates to George Tenet as director, and certainly daily updates at other agencies as the program came together and then began to operate. But all told, 17 different entities within the U.S. government had to come together, work together to make this happen.
Remarkable. And it was always part of the plan, right, to arm it. But that was sort of the next big step, was to actually figure out how to weaponize this system. And you decided on Hellfire. Why? Why did you pick Hellfire of all the different systems out there?
Well, to be fair, I didn't pick Hellfire. In fact, I was against it at the beginning because I was a complete novice to the explosives and the weapons side of things. But and frankly, the name of the book, the Never Mind, We'll Do It Ourselves, really, the day we saw bin Laden in 2000, we weren't able to act on it, despite many things being put in place to be able to support that. It just wasn't going to come together. So then there was this, the agency was looking at the Pentagon was looking at the agency, everybody's looking at the White House. Regardless of where you want to point, the system didn't close the loop. And then there was this, let's do it ourselves. Let's figure this out. Because at the moment, we're like, can we just crash the Predator into them? Which the
really?
Self-preservation aspects of the technology wouldn't have allowed us to do that. So we did. We went on a
have an autopilot that would cause
correct.
It
was gonna recover itself despite our best efforts. So to be fair, the Predator has a wing weight of about 100 pounds. General Atomics makes the Predators, and some of our engineers were saying, we're not sure it can handle the weight or the thrust of a missile coming off of it. And my naive approach was, if we can carry 100 pounds, give me 99 pounds of high explosives and something to hold it all together,
paper mache.
Which is a horrible solution. But the Air Force didn't have anything small enough that we could put on the wing. So we went to the Army. We went down to Redstone Arsenal and started talking to the engineers on there. Like, what do you have? And they put Hellfire on the table. And this is a system that was proven out in Vietnam and elsewhere. It's been around for a long time. But it was intended to be fired off of a helicopter. Mm-hmm. When we told the manufacturer that we were going to take it to 3 times that altitude, they said, "Well, you avoid the warranty if you do that." And we did, so we did it anyway. But that's where Hellfire came from. Okay. It was had the right weight. We could laser guide it. It was adequate to the mission set that we were looking at that point in time. Subsequently, we saw that it was an anti-tank weapon. Our targets were people in the open or pickup trucks, mm-hmm. not armor, not tanks. So it was a little too powerful in some cases. So we had to make some modifications. But it's proven itself over time.
So walk us through 9/11 and what that did with the program's speed and sense of urgency, and early successes with the armed Predator.
Yeah, so 9/11, I think everybody does the same thing. They reflect back on where were they, what were they going through. I think for us, we had already pulled our systems out of theater to make modifications, to go through the weaponization process. And because we were in the winter, going into winter as well, which was going to limit our flying windows. So we were already had everything back in the U.S. We had weaponized it in the months leading up to 9/11, and in fact, we were just about ready to go back in theater. So when we say we were flying 7 days, 8 days after 9/11, we were, but we had to move a lot of stuff to get there. But we were pretty close to ready anyway at that point. But all the process problems that we had leading up to 9/11, like who has the authority to pull the trigger on this weapon system? Can it be a uniformed military person? Can it be a contractor? Does it have to be a staff officer at the agency? We had more lawyers than engineers, slight exaggeration, but not much. We had a lot of lawyers, saying, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, military, same thing. 9/11, that all went out the window. And it was, how fast can you move? And, we'll figure out the other pieces. So a very deliberate effort to get in theater, to do that intelligence collection, to prep now for manned aircraft that were going to be involved in the war. We were the only ones that had flown there. We knew what the capabilities of the surface-to-air missile systems were. We knew what the capabilities of the MiG aircraft, the fighters, the Russian aircraft that the Afghans had. So our intel people became, highly sought after by the military planners that were now going to put manned aircraft over Afghanistan. The ground people going in were looking for, who are the commanders that we're working with, who's been supportive of the program,
Mm-hmm.
where should we interface? So a lot of things cooked off in that first, 30, 60 days of that planning effort. And then night one of the war, we're, tasked to go find Mullah Omar, the head of the Taliban. And
this is about 7 days, 9 days after 9/11. I forget the exact date.
So, we flew, I think, 9 days after to start that pattern of life development, to understand where targets were. And then first night of the war in November, we're sitting over top of Omar's compound.
Gotcha.
And a very unstable decision-making process, between, you have Tommy Franks as the commander at CENTCOM. It's his war. George Tenet having this capability, which is still in a compartmented program at that point. We weren't even on literally weren't on the map for an asset that most people were able to see and know that it was there. It was still, the compartmentation had kind of run its course at that point, but procedurally we hadn't pulled it back. And we wound up shooting a Hellfire that first night, really to enable a bigger platform to come in. But it was the first shot in conflict, and it was down just outside of Kandahar.
And it was successful.
It was successful for what it was intended to do.
Okay.
There was a lot of debate over what was a legitimate target. We don't shoot at hospitals, we don't shoot at schools, we don't shoot at religious institutions. We had the constraints on the system to get a shot lined up was very hard at that time. It's gotten so much easier, but you had to be at a right altitude. You had about a 5-degree angle of attack that you had to come in on, and your target doesn't always cooperate and staying where you think they're going to be. So, but by the time we got to the point of having a legitimate engagement, we got the success we were looking for.
And success begat success, and you started to ramp up the program, and it became integral to the agency's effort, and it's kind of throughout the war on terror.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by the extent of success that it ultimately achieved?
Yes, I think you can't not be surprised by 9/11 and anything from before that then took place after. If I never envisioned going more than 12, 24 months in this program, and we really were moving so fast on our development process that we didn't really pause to think, where is this going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 25 years? We thought it'd be cool if one day there was one hanging in the Smithsonian, and there is. But that was about as far down the road as we looked at the program. Now, looking at it and looking at the ability to have a unmanned platform take that risk that previously had to be done by a U.S. service member or a coalition service member, but to take that, to preserve that life, to minimize the risk to our troops, and put a technology enabler in there instead, that's an awesome capability. With it comes awesome responsibility. That it's got to be used. It's got to be used right. Some of that, we have an unfair advantage. We had an unfair advantage in being able to send a machine to do something that everybody else had to send a human to do. And it allows you to step into an imbalance of, would you engage in that scenario if you had to put a man in the loop?
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
So it really changes your decision-making piece. But our process that we evolved during those early months and years on how to develop a target list, what constituted a legitimate target, and then how to work through the decision process and the approvals process, it evolved substantially over time. With, we spent more time in those early years looking at it from the perspective of, how do we know we have a legitimate target? What are our multiple sources of intelligence to confirm that this is a legitimate target? How are we avoiding collateral damage? And then when you take that challenge and you look back at Hellfire as the weapon, you say, here's a weapon that is so accurate, so precise, and some of the newer variants on it, where you're literally picking the seat of the car that you want to hit, or picking the window of the building that you want to hit, where previously you were dropping 1,000-pound bombs on those buildings. Now you're literally going through the window and isolating your target and preserving the lives around them. So those capabilities, the accuracy of that technology, the policies and procedures that were evolved to support that, really make it a very, very powerful capability.
I'm glad you talked about some of the practices that put in place with regard to collateral, because, at the time and still today, there are some critics who describe the agency as being a bunch of cowboys that were launching things willy-nilly. Clearly, the technology had advanced. That's not what you were doing.
Correct.
But then you also talked about the approvals process, and to the extent that you can, how high up would such approvals go? Was it for every shot, or is it just an approval to operate at a certain time, a certain location? How did that work?
Well, for the very first series of shots, it was the director of CIA and the 4-star general at CENTCOM. Now that authority got delegated over time, but it never got delegated below the SIS, the senior service level. And there were always lawyers involved, both on the military side and the agency side. And I didn't go too far into it, but that first night, that first shot, we didn't take shots that night because we couldn't agree that it was a good shot. And if we couldn't agree, we didn't do it. We were hypersensitive to getting it right, to the extent where when an analyst said, I think that might be a mosque because it's got a tower on it that looks like a minaret. Well, at that moment, that is no longer a target, regardless of who's there. So, that I think, as it played out in real time, was enough to stop the process.
Gotcha.
So, and those procedures, I don't know where they're delegated to at this point, but it was a massive responsibility, and it was really only entrusted to a few people.
Alec, looking back at the program, how do you describe its degree of success and its importance to at least the agency's war on terror?
It's probably not understating it to say it has really changed the way that we prosecute conflicts and wars. You can take it up to, the diversity of terrain that it's operated in, the countries that it's operated over, the lives that it has saved by, keeping service members out of harm's way, to me is the significant accomplishment. The ability to, if you look at other targets within the Al-Qaeda structure that were subsequently taken off the board years later, would those have been engagements where we would have put troops on the ground to have that effect? And I think in a lot of the cases that answer was probably no. If you look at the current evolution and where things have gone over time, it's a substantial force multiplier. And even by 2003, I wasn't supporting a program from headquarters anymore. I was in Afghanistan as a chief of base, and I didn't want to go out on missions without having Predator overhead. Yeah. It became such a capability to be able to look over the next hill, to be able to develop those patterns of life and know which building we're going into in that village rather than randomly starting to go through buildings in a village. Even in that 2003 timeframe, it was changing the way that we were developing targets and the way we were looking for threats.
Do you think the agency could repeat such a success as the Predator program?
I think you would need you need those big personalities, and they're different than they were at that point in time, but you need that rallying opportunity. Yeah. But from a technology development perspective, the current versions of what we did with Predator is probably more in the AI space. There's a big push now from the administration for drone dominance, for scaled manufacturing. So I think yes. I hope yes. I hope the personalities are there to take that commitment and go against current threats with novel new technologies and capabilities.
But it takes focus and it takes leadership, right?
It takes focus. It takes leadership. It takes some determination, some stubbornness.
Willingness to say never mind, we'll do it ourselves.
Right. Willingness to say. In fact, there's a press release today on the CENTCOM flew their first one-way attack attritable system off of a ship within probably the last, call it early mid-December, and it is a program that follows some of those same lines of effort of, this isn't the way we traditionally do things, but it's changing warfare, yet again, a new chapter.
So the Predator program really did change the paradigm, opened up, a whole new kind of aspect to conflict, which others have followed and pursued with vigor. And I'm thinking just in the last year with the Ukrainian Operation Spiderweb, in which they struck deep in Russian territory using small drones to knock out their bomber fleet, a substantial portion of their bomber fleet. Operation Narnia, which was launched by the Israeli Mossad in Iran, targeting their leadership, particularly with the leadership of the Iran nuclear program. So others have followed in your path and kind of expanded the scope. And what do you see as the future for drone warfare?
I think the technology has become so so common, so available. At when we were flying Predator, it was $3 million an aircraft. Now the current versions of that, the Gray Eagles and Reapers, are probably tenfold the cost. But then when you look at Ukraine and you look at the ability for hobby class technologies to be weaponized, to have the intelligence picture integrated with them, and to have an effect on the battlefield for thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of dollars. You've given everybody the ability to step into having an air capability. And I think that, you mentioned Spiderweb. What a phenomenal, not just technology program, an operation, but intelligence at large, to be able to infiltrate these vehicles, these capabilities, these platforms, stage them, and then operate them. The technology to be able to do that.
They recruited human assets to drive the vehicles. Right?
Exactly, and then to take $100 platforms against multi-million-dollar platforms, in their home turf, phenomenal capability. That requires that innovation and necessity being the mother of invention, and that's certainly what the Ukrainians have been doing. The technology that's behind that, I think we overlook some of the complexity. These are what were hobby class drones, but they're working in a contested environment where they need to have resilient comms. And when their comms get denied, that's where you had the fiber optic systems develop from. So they put up a roadblock, and they'll find another approach to continue moving. So those types of evolutions of overcoming your adversary's next move. The Ukrainians are doing it exceptionally well, and the technology that's developed out of there, we really need to be paying attention to. We're probably not going to fight like the Ukrainians are fighting, but we need to. It's a live environment for denied comms. Yeah. It's a live environment for jamming activity. It's a live environment for force on force. There's massive learning that I hope is taking place there.
So let's talk a little bit about the future of drone swarming, and how do you see that evolving, and how do you see that impacting warfare?
I think where we sit today is that you've got the ability to put massive amounts of aircraft into a piece of airspace, or massive amounts of boats in a piece of maritime environment. What's still evolving is the ability for those platforms to communicate with each other, and to follow a good set of predetermined decision-making criteria. So, as an example, everybody likes to talk about the Straits of Taiwan, and in the event of a force-on-force conflict with China in defense of Taiwan, what is that going to look like? If you were to say, I can put 1,000 drones, one-way attack systems into the Straits, they've got to be able to communicate, and they've got to be able to organize, they've got to be able to task and subtask. Otherwise, it's a really bad day for the first boat that they see, and the rest of the platforms are going to get through to their target. You need that ability to, for the systems, without external comms, to be able to say, you 5, 10, 15 are going to go after this target. The rest of us are going to go look for another target. So, it's going to be a comms denied environment. It's going to be probably a space denied environment. So the ability to have confidence that those systems are going to be operate in that swarm that's a real current.
And some of those
challenge.
Systems will be underwater.
Some of those systems will be underwater, and doing that communications bridge between the above surface and the subsurface isn't trivial by itself. And you can look at there's a lot of mom and pop type companies that are providing great capabilities. The administration is really pushing for moving at speed and for bringing down the barriers to being a service provider or a material provider to the Department of War. And you can look at the Andurils, and you can look at the General Dynamics, and you can look at Boeing's and Lockheed's, and they all have a part to play. They all have a seat at the table. But at some point, Anduril's dive submarine needs to be able to talk to somebody else's stratospheric platform. So that architecture is incredibly important at this stage.
And getting way more complex. But all starting with the Predator program that Alec, you and your team started over 2 decades ago. What a remarkable achievement. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I appreciate you being on Intelligence at the Edge. We're going to have you back again. I think maybe there'll be some notable use of drones in the future. We'd love to get your thoughts and commentary when that happens.
Happy to do so. Yeah, thank you.
Alec Bierbauer, thank you so much.